Determine each number's distance from 0. If I had a number line here, 12.5 is to the right of 0. The distance from 0 is 12.5. If I had negative 47.8, the distance from 0 is 47.8. It's just to the left. Fill in the remaining distances from each of these values to 0. Play around the ring toss game. Which player do you think wins? Player A landed on 3 and player B landed on 1. So I think player A wins because that's the greater score. Nope. It says player B wins. Okay, so maybe it's the lower score. Player A is at -4 and player B is at -1. So maybe player A, since the player A has the lower score. Nope. Player B wins. Play one more round. Which player do you think wins? Okay, it's not the lowest. It's not the highest. Maybe it has to do with the distance from 0 like we saw in our warm-up. I think player B wins because they are farthest from 0. Let's try player B. Now, player A wins. So perhaps it is the one that is the closest to 0. The absolute value of a number is the distance between a number and 0 on a number line. So 3 is 3 away from 0, and -4 is 4 away from 0. So how does using the absolute value help you determine the winner of the game? So we can see here that this one is 3 away and this one is 4 away. So the absolute value helps us see which of these distances is the closest to 0. Player A has a score of 5. On what number could player A's ring land? Five is 0, or 5 is 5 away from 0. On what other number could player A's ring have landed? We could go 5 in the opposite direction. So player A's ring could have landed on -5. Rings landing on -5 and 5 would both have a score of 5. On a number line, -5 and 5 are both 5 units, or 5 marks, away from 0 if we counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Therefore, the absolute value of -5 is 5, and the absolute value of +5 is 5. We can write that same statement using the notation for absolute value. And the way we indicate absolute value is with these long vertical lines here. So the absolute value of -5 is equal to 5, and the absolute value of +5 is 5. Use the interactive to find two locations on the number line that both result in a score of 3. So we need to get closer to 0. The absolute value of 3 is 3. and the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Fill in the correct number to make each number sentence true. Use the example provided to help you. Well, 6. How far is 6 away from 0? That's a distance of 6. How far away is negative 6 from 0? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as well. How far away is 15 from 0? 15. And how far away is negative 15 from 0? What if I try to put in negative 15? What would happen? Yep, it says error, input a number. So we don't want that negative symbol there. We want positive 15 because distance is positive. When you're measuring with a ruler, you wouldn't say, or I guess a measuring tape, you wouldn't say, oh, that distance is negative 15 feet. You would just say it's 15 feet. So when we're measuring distances from 0, we should use positive values. So 8.5 is 8.5 away from 0, and negative 8.5 is also 8.5 away from 0. What is the absolute value of 0? Well, let's drag this point to 0. The absolute value of 0 is 0. But it also asks why. 0 is 0 away from the number 0 on the number line. What number has an absolute value of negative 15? How do you know? Well, if we move this up to 15, that distance, remember we talked about using that measuring tape or the ruler, that distance is positive 15. If we go over here to negative 15, the distance is also positive. So there is no number with an absolute value of negative 15. And then it says, how do you know? Distance is always measured with a positive number. Which statements are true? Select all that apply. The distance from negative 4.5 to 0 is 4.5. So it can't be this one. But it can be this one. The distance from 4.5 to 0 is 4.5. But it's not negative 4.5. Here this one says, find the absolute value of 4.5, which we did here, and it comes out to 4.5. But then take the opposite of that. And the opposite of that is negative 4.5. So we're also going to check this one. And the reason this one is okay to come out to a negative number is because that negative is on the outside of those absolute value bars. So we have 3 that are correct. 1, 2, 3. It asks, why didn't you choose these two? The absolute value represents the distance from a number to 0. Distance is a measurement that is positive. When we travel on a number line, And as we move towards 0 from the right, so as we move this way from the right, these numbers are decreasing. You can see it goes 18, 17, 16, 15, 14. They are decreasing. When we travel on a number line and as we move towards 0 from the right, the absolute value, so watch these numbers now, also decreases. These slides are just showing you how people in the class have responded. So since it's just me, it's showing that the numbers decrease and the absolute values decrease, and those both have 1 vote. When we travel on a number line and as we move towards 0 coming from the left, those numbers do what? So -12, -11, -10, -9, -8. As we move towards the right, those numbers increase. But what happens with their absolute values? Their absolute value goes 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. The absolute value of these numbers decrease. Again, this is just showing you how the class has voted. Here we have 2 truths and a lie. Identify the lie. A number and its opposite have the same absolute value. Well, a number and its opposite could be like 8 and -8. Do those both have the same distance from 0? That's true. We are looking for the lie. The absolute value of a positive number is a negative number, like the absolute value of 15. Is the absolute value of 15 a negative number? No. So that's probably our lie. But let's check the last one just to make sure. A number's opposite can be greater than the number. Well, a number's opposite. So if we had -10, the opposite of -10 is 10. Can -10's opposite be greater than -10? Yeah, -10 is bigger, or 10 is bigger than -10. So we want to check the second one is the lie. Give a counterexample to show that the lie is a false statement. Explain. So the absolute value of 42, we need a positive number, is positive 42. Distance is always measured with a positive number. Identify the lie. The absolute value of a negative number will always be positive. -2 is 2 away from 0, so that's true. It should always be a positive. The absolute value of a negative number that is close to 0 is less than the absolute value of a negative number that is far from 0. Well, a negative number that's close to 0 is like -1. We had our number line, -1, -2, -3, -4. One that's close to 0, that would be 1. And one that's far from 0, we could use -4. It says the absolute value of one that's close to 0 is less than the absolute value of one that is far from 0. Well, 1 is less than 4, so that's true. Remember, we're looking for the lie. The absolute value of a positive number will always be greater than the absolute value of a negative number. Well, here's a positive number with an absolute value of 3. Here's a negative number with an absolute value of 18. The absolute value of the positive number, 3, is smaller than the absolute value of the negative number, 18. So this one is the lie. And it says give a counterexample. We just had one over here on the right in blue. The absolute value of positive 3 is equal to 3. The absolute value of negative 18 is equal to 18. But 18 is greater than 3. So their absolute values, this one has a greater absolute value than this one. And it said the positive will always have the greater, but in this case, the negative number had the greater absolute value. So here you can see when we identified the lie, we said B was the lie for the first one, and C was the lie for the second one. On the number line, mark the location of the number Q that has an absolute value that is greater than the absolute value of the number P. So the absolute value is talking about the distance. We want the distance from 0 to Q to be larger than the distance from 0 to P. So Q can be way over here, or it could be over here, as long as the distance from 0 to Q is farther. So I'm going to lock it in here. This distance from 0 to Q is greater than this distance from 0 to P. It's farther. This is just going to show us our answers, and then we can click check your work. This shows the distance from O to P. On this number line, mark the location of a number Q that has an absolute value less than the absolute value of the number P. So that means it should be closer to 0. So I'm going to put Q closer to 0 than P. Now we can check our work. So this distance from 0 to P is listed here. So we can see that I placed Q closer than that absolute value. Keep in mind this was a digital lesson, so in your workbook you may just have notes from what you did today, and then the rest of it can be completed on the computer. You should also have your warm-up taken care of in your composition book.